Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of my 10-minute moan. The topic of this 10-minute moan is two things about Stephen Flynn. You know the bald guy, so Westminster, leader of the SNP, down there, that guy. Now, one of them's dead quick, right? Stephen Flynn has been quoted today as saying the SNP could actually win more seats at Westminster than they have just now. And no, seriously, it did. And the second thing I want to talk about is a story that was actually covered yesterday. But thinking about it overnight, I think we've just found out the truth behind what led ultimately to Humza Yousaf being stood down as First Minister. And a lot believe that it was Stephen Flynn's doing, playing games behind the scenes, that led to that. And now, with all the information I have available, I am actually very positive that Stephen Flynn was doing all this solely to protect one thing in the world, and that was his seat as an Aberdeen MP. How embarrassing would it be if at an election the leader of the SNP Westminster bloc was to lose his seat, which I think is possible. And I now believe that that is the sole driver behind Stephen Flynn doing what he's been doing behind the scenes, which led to the removal of the First Minister of the Scottish Parliament. So, the story yesterday that got my head thinking was covered in a few places. This particular one comes off the Express. Stephen Flynn sparks SNP and Scottish Green Rammy amid chaos surrounding party's environmental policy. The SNP's Westminster leader U-turned on Humza Yousaf's position of supporting a windfall tax and Nicola Sturgeon's presumption against new oil and gas licences, as he appears to call the shots within the Nats. Excuse me. Stephen Flynn has sparked claims of chaos in the SNP and caused a Lorna Slater tantrum after suggesting that his party has made another U-turn, this time on oil and gas. The Nats in the last year have changed their mind on numerous topics, including a ban on Bully XLs and wood-burning stoves. And now the Westminster leader has claimed that his party no longer supports a windfall tax on energy giants, and indicated that the Scottish Government was also about to change its position on the presumption against new licences in the North Sea. Interesting move. First Minister Humza Yousaf and Nicola Sturgeon had supported the previous policies retrospectively. Now, this is interesting because I've been saying for a long time that the Nats, the cult Nats, the proper loopy ones, right? They, over the last few years, have claimed that in 2014, the referendum, their white paper, their dreams and their excuses for having a independent Scotland were based on the riches that could be obtained from oil. Now, anybody that lived through that chaotic time will remember that was driven down our throats all the time. And look at Norway. Norway was always used as this example. And everybody must remember that as well, because Norway had so much money due to oil. Forgetting that the way the industry in Norway and the industry in the North Sea, for our North Sea oil, is completely different, right? But that's what they used. They kept holding Norway up as an example. And now I'm led to believe by nationalists that was never the case. Because oil's a bad thing now, because 2 years ago, the SNP didn't get enough seats in Holyrood and needed to tie the Greens into a coalition to give them a government. And at that point, oil was like, bad, off the table, no oil, right? So then you questioned it with nationalists. You say, well, was that not what was going to drive independence 10 years ago? Oh, no, never. Loads of other things, like what? Whiskey, right? They're deranged. So, but that's what really happened. And now, the leader of the SNP MPs in Westminster, is the sitting MP for Aberdeen, which is the capital for oil for the United Kingdom. So if we're going to keep saying oil's bad and we're not going to put any money, we're not going to invest in it, we're just going to run it, stop drilling, just stop oil, right? You can imagine his constituency, A, would become not as rich a place to live, and B, would upset quite a lot of his constituents, and which could lead to C, them no voting for him. So now what Flynn's wanting to do is take us all the way back to 2014 and this thing that we apparently never spoke about then, and the oil was the saviour. He's wanting to take us back to that position, which I tend to actually, I'm cool with that. What I'm not cool with is what he's done behind the scenes to try and get this whole U-turn in place, which is a completely obvious campaign so he can save his seat and keep his job, which is under threat because we've got an election coming up in July, right? Anyway, so he's now saying that no, we don't support the windfall tax, which was a tax aimed at big companies like big oil giants and stuff, because that would obviously upset some of the businesses in this constituency, and totally oppose the Greens, which, if you look back to the run-up to Humza getting the sack, Stephen Flynn came all the way up from Westminster to have a meeting with Humza, and the next day the Greens get kicked out of Parliament. They get kicked out of government, sorry. They binned the Bute House Agreement, which then led to Humza standing down 4 or 5 days later, something like that. So, and I believe this was all driven by Flynn, and I believe now we're seeing the reasons why Flynn was needing it. He needed the Greens out the road so that he could then get what the MSPs in Holyrood, which is nothing to do with him, to overturn previous policies which the Greens would never have agreed to. Are you following? So back to the story. Now the Westminster leader has claimed that his party no longer supports the windfall. We've done that bit, beg your pardon. But his comments in BBC Radio Scotland led to him being branded dishonest and desperately out of touch by Scottish Labour, who have outlined its support for both of this. And it has also upset the Scottish Greens, imagine that, who have blasted their former coalition partners for shifting position. Mr Flynn admitted that the SNP no longer support any form of windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies are making, as he makes a desperate attempt to keep his Aberdeen South seat. He hit out at Labour, as he said, "I hate to break it to the Labour Party, but there is no way of reaching net zero, and there's no way of capitalising on our offshore and our onshore renewables potential without these individuals." Goes in up to oil and gas, which I don't really have a problem with, because if it is, a decent income for the country, then why would you want to ban it? And that's possible now that the Greens are out of government. He also hinted at the government's delayed energy strategy, which is set to be published before the general election in July 4, would remove the presumption against new North Sea oil and gas developments being approved, something backed by the Scottish Greens when in coalition. Something else that will now happen that couldn't happen with the Greens in, that Flynn helped remove through his run-up and his junket up to Holyrood and his lunch with Humza, which led to Humza sacking the Greens. It's all falling into place now, isn't it? Mr Flynn said that the SNP supports a just, sustainable energy transition that protects the workforce that we currently have and ensures we have transition to come. The Scottish Government has a draft energy policy that is out for consultation. The Scottish Government will, of course, in due course, come forward with its final energy strategy. Is this the bit where Stephen's kidding on he doesn't know what's in that final strategy? The energy strategy as it stands is not published in its final form. I am very much looking forward to it being published in its final form. I think we all need to recognise, irrespective of where you are, the importance of oil and gas sector in Scotland's economy. We're going full circle, aren't we, to something we denied being involved with 10 years ago. And the fact that those 100,000 individuals that we are talking about are absolutely crucial in our journey to net zero. It has led to stark criticism from Scottish Labour, with Shadow Scottish Secretary Ian Murray claiming that the Nats are now supporting huge business over Scottish families. He said, "Families across Scotland are struggling to put food on the table as the cost of living crisis continues to bite, but Stephen is more concerned about profits of gas and gas giants." You forgot to add, "and keeping his seat." Stephen Flynn's comments today are dishonest and desperately out of touch, and this dizzying string of U-turns shows how chaotic the SNP energy policy is. It is morally bankrupt for the SNP to insist nurses in Scotland have to pay more tax while massive multinational companies should pay less. The SNP has turned its back on workers and abandoned climate leadership, but Labour will deliver where it failed. Scottish Greens co-leader, here we go, Ms Slater, raged. We are in a climate emergency. This is getting worse by the day. Any move away, I'm really sorry, I can't do a Canadian accent. Any move away from the presumption would be reckless in the extreme. It would send a terrible message to young people of today while pumping more pollution into the air and ripping up our social contract with future generations. It is clear that Stephen Flynn wants the policy to be diluted or dropped, but this is a choice for the First Minister. She called on John Swinney to rule this out. There you go. Greens are raging. Quite happy with that. Just try to see if there's anything else worth reading out. There's a lot of nonsense at the bottom of it. Who said this? The Environmental Party stuck about further after Mary McAllen was unsure whether the unpopular Heat in Buildings Bill, which banned gas boilers, would proceed through Holyrood in its current form. Oh, I've got to be raging. Mark Ruskell said Mary McAllen, ordinarily a clear voice of reason on climate, and her party was unable to confirm crucial details and timings around the climate bill, the environmental bill, heating and buildings, or environmental rights. All things that we have set alarm bells ringing for campaigners up and down the country by casting real and worrying doubt on whether this government will meet its legal climate obligations. It is clear the SNP cannot be trusted on climate, trusted to keep their word, or trusted not to side with the Tories on the most destructive environmental policy seen in a generation. God, if upset the Greens, what will we do? Oh no. So there we go. I think it's clear now that why Stephen Flynn is turning the clock back and going 180 degrees is to save his skin. When you now think what's happened over the last few weeks in Scottish politics with the decision to kick the Greens out, which was strongly tinted at the time, had a lot to do with Stephen Flynn pushing Humza to do it, which inevitably then lent him to lose his job as the First Minister. This was all done because Stephen Flynn is one of the most selfish men in government. Or he's not even in government, in politics. There you are. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If you've not already done so, please consider subscribing. Please get involved in the comments below. You always get good fun with them. But most importantly of all, Mr. Stephen Flynn, the SNP, or on any of their vastly reducing number of cult members. Everybody else, have a great day. Cheery bye now.